This is my evaluation for my final project, the music video for the song Broken Home by Getz and Folly Ray. I arrived at my original film idea, to start with, it wasn't a particularly complex version of it. The family moved apart, then went their separate ways, and it was the storyline of each member so that they're intertwined, so that it cut between each one. I came up with that idea when I first listened to the song. As soon as I listened to it, the idea just popped into my head straight away. I find this is the best way for me to come up with ideas because I have quite a visual way of thinking. So with my ideas, if I can imagine it in my head, then it's highly likely that I'll be able to actually film it and get it to work. While storyboarding and doing the mind maps for the idea, I then thought of the idea of maybe changing it up slightly so that the family then, or two members of the family then come back together. The idea I had before seemed slightly dark and an inappropriate way of saying it or showing the idea of it. So then I thought if I add that bit at the end, it will seem like something good has happened from it, so it won't be too shocking because you know the whole story of it and what happened afterwards, rather than just cutting it off halfway through. So the research that I did was quite effective on helping me form my idea and change it for the better. So for my contextual research, I analysed 3 videos. These were My Story by Krypton Conan, Rebel by Getz, and The A-Team by Ed Sheeran. I found that a lot of the effects that we use were mainly raising and lowering the saturation depending on the atmosphere being given across. I also found that quite a lot of them had bits in it where they had earlier bits from the story come over the top of a shot. Well, that was in the video from My Story by Krypton Conan. I found that really effective because it sort of refreshes the memory of the viewer of what happened throughout the video. Even though they've seen it, but they might have forgotten something right at the start, so then it shows up again. That's why I tried to put that in my final edit, and I did successfully, I think. In the video for the song Rebel, I found that there was a lot of colour suggestion. So there was a lot of red in the video. In fact, it was set in a room that was red. This gives the effect of anger, and part of the idea of this was that there was a slight undertone of anger in the story while the daughter of the family is homeless purely because she has no one there to help her. So that's why for these shots I tried to add the slightest bit of red midtones to it in edit. And I think it ended up looking how it was supposed to because the red standing out and then everything else in the background sort of had a red tint to it, but not too much of a red tint so that it's that noticeable. So for my audience research, I went on YouGov Profiles, the UK version, and Gets was not on there, so I searched up for a similar artist, which was Dizzy Rascal, who makes very similar music, but just in a slightly different style, and I was slightly shocked by the responses at first, because it was like both a mixture of both genders, but mainly people who were just of the black culture. I found this interesting because I would have thought that, I personally thought that it was mainly men who listened to it and teenage boys who listened to it, but I was wrong. I thought, being honest, I did think I knew the audience of it, although it was such a wide range of people who viewed it that it was like slightly difficult to get an exact audience. But the audience that mainly was there was people of the black culture, like male and female equal amount, from about the age of 13 to about the age of 20 or 30. This was backed up by my survey results, where I got almost the same age groups. I went to a place in between the London boroughs of Stratford and Clapham, where Gets is actually from, and looked around there and took some inspiration from the buildings and the people I saw walking about, which was when I decided that it has to be in an urban environment for most of it, because the place where he's from is a very urban area with lots of houses that are in just long rows of houses, and it has a lot of different people in, and a lot of people squeezed into a small area. So that's part of the reason why I decided to put the time lapses in, because it shows that there are a lot of people in that area moving around. It just generally shows that there are a lot of people in the area. From my technical research, I found that the clothing that would be needed I wouldn't have to get, because most of my actors already have the clothing that would be required. And then I also found out from doing test shots as part of the technical research that I could do some of the techniques that I was hoping to do, such as masking and the transition with the fence. Although there were some effects that I tried out, such as the transition where it goes from a black screen and it looks like someone's waking up. Although I decided not to put that in the end, because it didn't really fit what was happening. It was meant to be where the first mask kicks in, where there's 3 people there, or 4 people sat there. It was meant to be going into that bit, but then it just didn't fit, so I just decided not to put it in. Another bit of research that I did was I broke down the lyrics as the script breakdown. So I went on the site Genius, where they have all the lyrics and the meanings of the lyrics, and I looked through at the meanings of the lyrics, and they sort of went along with the story that I had. So that that further gave me confidence that the story will work with the song. So the planning of my film, so the pre-production part of it, was fairly easy and plain sailing, really. The first thing I did was the consent forms. I always do the consent forms first, purely because I know then my actors will almost definitely be able to act once they've signed. That also means that I don't have to focus on doing that later, when, let's say, my mind might not be focused on that. I might just be focused on getting everything else done. After that, I did the location recce's and went round to each location and found the address of it and everything about it. I feel I was a bit vague about two of the locations, which was the main road going through Lapford and Exeter High Street. Although I filmed at different points along those two streets or roads, so I felt that I couldn't give a precise location, purely because I was filming at a lot of different points and I wasn't sure at what points at that time I was going to film along, because at different times there's different obstacles that might be there. Although with the other locations I could definitely say where everything was being filmed, because other than that the locations were outside different buildings along the high street and in my house. With the locations in my house, I could then make sure that every room was free when I needed it to be, so that I wasn't struggling around at the last minute just to get the room sorted. After that, I did the production schedule. This is so the actors could say when they were free. Luckily, only one of my actors, only two of my actors work, and I only needed one of them for 2 or 3 scenes. So, and the other one has quite a lot of time off work because they don't work a lot. So there was enough time to fit filming in when everyone was available. So after I'd found when everyone was available, I'd assign a location to a day. I sometimes even put more than one location on a day, depending on how many scenes needed to be filmed at different locations in the area. Because in Lapford there was only really time for one day of filming. So after this, then I had the plan of when everything was being done. This was when I started to feel a bit more comfortable with pushing forward with the rest of the paperwork, because I like having a routine. So this meant that I had the routine sorted, and then I could focus on the rest of the pre-production. So what I did was, instead of with the production schedule, there's usually the pre-production, the filming time or the filming schedule, and the post-production schedule. But instead of doing that, I thought I'd combine them all into one, so it's one big schedule. This just makes it easier to look through instead of just having 3 separate ones. The next bit of paperwork I did was the character design and set design. These were pretty much the easiest bits to do, because the sets were staying as they were apart from 2 props were being put in, and the characters just wore normal clothing. So as long as for some scenes the actors were wearing the right clothes, which were the same clothes as they had in, let's say, the previous scene that was in the same part, then they would be alright. Such as during the homeless scenes, the daughter, the character, or the actor who would be playing the daughter of the family would be wearing the same clothes the whole time. That's to keep up the continuity of the story. I then did the call sheets and sent them out to the actors so that they knew where they had to be when, and then the transport arrangements to get to each location. They already knew this to begin with, because I've worked with all the actors that I've used before, but I still sent it to them anyway, just because that's the standard procedure. I did the storyboards last, purely because I found that was the easiest to do. As in, it was just, I found the drawing bit easy, and I typed that up as well. So I typed up all the details about what was happening before. So then, because my writing's not very neat, so I typed it up so that it could definitely be readable. Point where I'd got the production schedule done was definitely a time where my stress levels went down a lot, because I knew I could do the rest of it fairly easily. Also, when one of my actors messaged me saying that they couldn't make it on the morning of filming, that was one of the biggest milestones, really, other than another one which I'll get to in a minute. This is because this meant that I had to rearrange for a different day, which, because I was ahead at this time, I didn't really have a problem with. But if I had not been ahead, it might have caused me to not finish in time, which is why I made sure I did everything as quick as I could to make sure I was ahead. So the other big milestone while planning my idea and filming was one of my actors saying that they couldn't make it after signing the consent forms. It was about a couple of weeks after. I got a phone call from one of them saying that they were in trouble for some reason, so they couldn't do certain things, including filming outside of a certain area, which means that I couldn't then use them as an actor, which meant that I had to then try and find someone else, but I couldn't. That meant that I had to change my idea a bit and scrap one of the characters out. It was lucky that they weren't the main character, because that would have been a bit more difficult to scrap out than the one that I ended up scrapping out of the plan. Right, so it's only while editing this now that I've realised I forgot to say one thing about this. So they called me and said they couldn't make it before the end of the pre-production week that I assigned myself. So then I didn't actually use the consent form that they filled in, because there wasn't any point. Right, on to the next bit then. yes, I did change from my original plan. In fact, I changed it as soon as I removed one of the characters from it, which I've already mentioned. So that was one change. There was also a change that there was meant to be a lot more shots of the daughter of the family and her perspective of it, and then there was meant to be a lot more shots of perspectives more than there were. I know there was a lot of situation shots, but it was mainly supposed to be perspective shots, but I had to change that to shots of situations because that fitted the storyline of the song better. There was also the first screen at the start. It came up with the presenting bit, then it came up with the picture of the family that wasn't originally meant to have text over it, but then I couldn't find any other place to put the artist's name, so I had to put it there, even though it got slightly in the way of the family shot that was there. Like, text message is meant to appear in a shot where Chris is walking along with his phone, although that did not go to plan. And also I found it a bit difficult to get them in place and to get them to appear as I'd liked, so I decided not to put them in the end, which was why that shot can be confused with him lip syncing, whereas it's just him reading the message, because originally that was meant to be a shot of him on his own walking through the high street lip syncing, but then I tried it with him once and it didn't exactly go to plan, so I then had to change it slightly, and the lip syncing was scrapped for the idea of him walking along reading a text message from someone. Probably the time lapses, they went very well, and the changing in saturation, that worked very well. There was meant to be more of that, but yeah, I felt it worked as it was, so I didn't add any more in. That was another deviation, in fact, there. The shot at the start of the family stood there with the writing over, that was actually more effective than I thought it was going to look. That was another deviation as well. Most of the bits that weren't supposed to be in there, such as the shot at the start, that bit, and the detail I put at the end showing up the Instagram of the artists and the director, which was me. So that I'd seen that in other videos, so then I thought I want to try and stick to the usual sort of things with the ending. So then I put that in. I quite liked that. That wasn't meant to be in there originally, but it worked. And then the album art at the end, I quite like that. With also there's a bit at the end where there's lots of fades in on different things, fades in and out on different situations earlier in the video. I quite like that. Yeah, the bits that were most successful with it were the bits that I sort of put in from the other videos that I've seen, or bits that I'd had in my head that I wanted to do for a while, but then only just had the chance to implement them into videos. The bit where the song goes to then bring the daughter back. Unfortunately, on that road, because it's a main road through the village, lots of cars go past there, so there physically was not any more time that could be done or that could be taken up to film that. That was one of the 3 takes that we actually managed to get done, because there was a lot of cars going past, and in the end we had signs up that then, while we were filming, the cars then stopped, and it was a hassle to film that bit. But it didn't look like there was enough talk in there, which that was actually purely because the length of time that the shot had to be put in. If it could be put in a different time, then it would have had more things in, or more talking to explain the shot. It also took so long to film each one that the actress playing the daughter actually fell asleep, which was why the reaction looked so genuine, and that's why I chose that one specifically to go in there, purely because it looked genuine, because it was. Also, the masking at the start, this was identified as feedback as well, that there was a mask that where I had to cut it up because I didn't want people walking in front of it. It moved slightly, it looked like it moved slightly. That's where the camera by itself, because my tripod's not particularly strong, it moves slightly automatically if there's any slight wind, which I've struggled with since I've had the camera and the tripod, really. But yeah, I would say that needs further improvement. But if I feel I could have masked, instead of doing a box mask around, I could have drawn around the actual person and then just placed them, because then their position wouldn't have changed the whole time. Or I could have picked a time where it was less busy and then filmed it then. But I feel it still worked because the shot was so short that it was not that noticeable, and someone who was only being really picky could get or could pick up on it. Other than that, there's not much that I'd say could be improved about. Maybe the steadiness of the shots, because for most of them I had to hold the camera because the tripod wasn't tall enough. Yeah, that's all the ones I can think of, really. Probably the masking bits, I'd change some of them so there's different masking different bits are masked to give attention to different bits of the shot or to different parts of the screen. And I would also change that first mask so that it's all one shot, so I don't have to edit it at all, so there is no jumping and levitating of masks and anything like that. That's because it just doesn't make it seem as authentic or it doesn't make it seem as realistic if something levitates halfway through. Right, so I'm not as satisfied as I'd like to be. Right, I got it done. Yeah, that's like, it wasn't how I'd have liked it to have been. Ideally, if I had maybe more time filming, I would have made sure I got everything done to a professional standard. as close to a professional standard as I could. The reason I don't think it's as good as it could have been is because the actors mainly, I didn't have two of my actors were sort of a bit self-conscious at times, so they didn't do the best job, and one of them couldn't take it seriously at all, which that's a point that I can then learn from next time. Although I would say if I got proper actors and filmed it at different times maybe, then I would be really satisfied with it because it would have looked nice. But it's not quite how I planned it, so I'm not really that satisfied with it. My audience said they liked the film, or they liked the video, and then there were some bits of it which some people found confusing. That was mainly the bit where the text messages were supposed to show up, and the bit where it was cut into two screens where there was someone producing and the son singing into a microphone. I don't think they quite understood that it was a situation-based video. So that was the situation of the son then becoming a musician and recording a song. But I can understand how they might have found that a bit difficult, or a bit difficult to understand, and I also understand how I can't always, or I don't always display things in the right way for people to understand. So I can understand how they may have found it a bit confusing. My audience quite liked the starting bit with the fashion bits coming up with different bits of information about the song on. And they said it sort of was the slow introduction to it, then leading up to the verse, which was good, and that was meant to be like that, so it builds up like a rhythm in perfect time for when the drums kick in and the verse starts. My audience also said that sometimes the lip syncing was out of place, although that might have been because it was a situation that had nothing to do with the lip syncing at all, where there wasn't supposed to be lip syncing. But once again, that's understandable that they might have got confused with it. I myself, before I had to look at it a few times to actually get the storyline myself. But yeah, that's another thing. They said they had to look at it a few times to get, or some of them said they had to look at it a few times to get the storyline, which I had a difficulty with as well, although I think they mostly found it successful purely because it was only a minority of people that couldn't understand it to start with. Through completing this project, I've learned I need to get actors that take it seriously, and the most important thing to think about is actors mainly, planning as well, and knowing the timings of the film, or knowing the timings of the song, because that was another bit I had a struggle with. I kept on forgetting the timings of the song and what shot was going to be where, as well as that, there was an extra bit which didn't show up in the lyrics that I got, so that really did confuse me while filming, which is why in the end I just ended up having the music in the background of every shot so I knew exactly where it needed to go. I've also learnt that editing does take longer than I think it does, and I shouldn't overstress myself by saying a time when I think I'm going to be able to finish my edit, because I've learned I take a bit longer than most people to edit, purely because if it's not perfect I scrap it and start again. So what I would do differently is I was actually going to analyse more videos, which is one of the things I would do. For my contextual research, I had 5 videos that I planned on analysing to begin with, but then I realised I didn't have time to analyse all 5, so then I only picked 3 of them to analyse. The 3 ones which had the same sort of story and the same sort of atmosphere being given off. I would also probably interview the audience and ask them questions so that I get a better idea of the audience. This is purely because I found that the audience gave just about enough, the audience research that I had gave just about enough information for me to be able to add bits for them, although I could have done with a bit more. I will also conduct more test shots in the future, because I only did about 3 or 4 this time. I would probably try and do every shot that I'm planning on doing just to see if it would work, which takes time, but that would be how I would then know if it was perfect. Such as with the time lapses, I didn't actually try them before. I should have, because there were several ones where I went up to try and do the time lapse and it just didn't work the first time. So then I had to do them again, although with some of them they worked the first time, because then I found a location that just worked with the time lapse and didn't have that many vehicles blocking the view of the people that was there. I would probably try and use a faster song next time if I was going to do this project again in the future, purely because I like to challenge myself, and this was a challenge, but mainly with the editing. The actual editing shots with the music was fairly easy as it comes. I would probably do a song next time. I would probably film a video for a song next time that has hi-hat rolls in, so then it's like several pings one after the other that then have shots, so it has a flash, several flashes in a row that then cut between 2 shots, so then I'll be able to use varying transitions. I would also take a lot more time on reviewing the footage that I have, because I found that most of the footage I had was shaky, so then I had to stabilise it in Vegas, which means that I had to focus it on one person in the shot, which then who was still the whole time, so then the camera would move around them, or then there's a box, the screen would then move around them rather than it just being straight, so I didn't have to do that. That would mean that I could have done a lot more of the effects during the edit. Yeah, that's all I would do differently, really.